The U.S. Navy put 8,400 missiles on 85 warships instead of storing them in concrete bunkers on land. One satellite pass could wipe out a land depot. One precision strike and the entire arsenal vanishes. So the Navy embedded launch cells directly into destroyers and cruisers. Now America's missile magazine moves at 30 knots across 3 oceans, but that edge is collapsing. China's fleet will carry 9,000 vertical launch cells by 2025. That's more than the U.S. total, and American cruisers are retiring faster than new ships can replace them. The Navy's losing 2,000 cells before 2028. The floating vault strategy is under pressure from every direction. America's firepower isn't sitting in concrete bunkers anymore. It's sailing the oceans on 85 warships carrying roughly 8,400 vertical launch cells loaded with missiles. The U.S. Navy turned its fleet into a floating weapons vault, and the strategy is rewriting how naval power works. But here's what most people don't realize. That advantage is shrinking faster than anyone expected. For decades, military doctrine stacked missiles and bombs in fortified depots on land. Static, predictable, vulnerable. One satellite pass, one precision strike, and an entire arsenal could vanish. The Navy saw the problem and flipped the script. Instead of parking missiles in bunkers, they embedded launch cells directly into destroyers and cruisers. Now America's missile magazine moves at 30 knots, spreads across 3 oceans, and can't be wiped out with a single attack. Vertical launch systems changed everything. VLS cells are modular tubes built into a warship's deck. Each cell holds 1 missile. A destroyer might carry 96 cells. A cruiser carries 122. Multiply that across 85 ships, and you get 8,400 cells sailing the world right now. That's 8,400 missiles ready to launch without waiting for a supply convoy or an airfield. The reality is, the fleet became the magazine. This isn't just about capacity, it's about flexibility. Commanders load cells with whatever the mission demands. Air defense interceptors in one cell, Tomahawk cruise missiles in another, anti-submarine rockets in a third. The mix changes ship to ship, theater to theater. A destroyer in the Pacific might carry 60 interceptors and 36 strike weapons. That same destroyer 6 months later in the Atlantic swaps the loadout for a different threat. No bunker on Earth offers that kind of adaptability. The distributed model solves another problem: survivability. Lose one ship, and you lose maybe 96 cells. Painful, but the other 84 ships still carry 8,300 missiles. Lose a land depot, and you lose everything stored there. Mobile magazines spread the risk. They also complicate enemy targeting. Instead of hitting one fixed location, an adversary has to track and strike dozens of moving platforms scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. The truth is, distribution turns the entire surface fleet into a weapons network that's nearly impossible to eliminate in one blow. But the edge is narrowing. China's Navy is building VLS-equipped destroyers and cruisers at a pace the U.S. hasn't matched since the Cold War. By 2025, China's surface fleet is projected to carry nearly 9,000 vertical launch cells. That's more than America's 8,400. The gap that took the U.S. decades to build is collapsing in less than 10 years. And while the Navy plans to distribute firepower across even more hulls, retirements and high consumption rates are eating into the current total faster than new ships can replace them. Type "proud" in the comments if you think the Navy's floating arsenal strategy is the future of American sea power. The shift to floating magazines didn't happen overnight. It started in the 1980s when the Navy realized Cold War-era destroyers couldn't keep up with the Soviet threat. Ships back then used fixed launchers, one launcher per missile type. You wanted to fire an anti-aircraft missile? You used the air defense launcher. You wanted to fire a cruise missile? Different launcher, different system, different crew. Every weapon required its own dedicated hardware, and deck space ran out fast. The vertical launch system solved that problem with brutal efficiency. One cell, any missile. Engineers designed a universal tube that could fire everything from ship-killing harpoons to ballistic missile interceptors. The first VLS-equipped cruiser, USS Bunker Hill, entered service in 1986 carrying 122 cells. That single ship could launch more missiles faster than 3 older cruisers combined. The Navy saw the future and never looked back. By the 1990s, VLS became standard on every new destroyer and cruiser. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyers rolled out with 90 or 96 cells depending on the variant. The Ticonderoga-class cruisers carried 122. Even the new Zumwalt-class stealth destroyers, built for different missions entirely, included 80 VLS cells. What most people don't realize is that these cells aren't just storage, they're networked. A destroyer 200 miles away can launch a missile guided by data from an aircraft 500 miles in the opposite direction. The fleet doesn't just carry missiles, it coordinates them across battle groups in real time. The numbers tell the story. 85 U.S. warships spread across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean carry VLSLs right now. That's roughly 8,400 launch tubes distributed across 3 ship classes. For comparison, a single land-based missile depot might hold thousands of missiles, but it's one target, one strike, and it's gone. The Navy's 85 ships can't all be hit at once. They operate in different hemispheres under different commanders, supporting different missions. The magazine isn't just floating, it's everywhere. And it's not just defensive. VLS cells carry Tomahawk cruise missiles with a range over 1,000 miles. A destroyer sitting off the coast can hit targets deep inland without putting pilots or aircraft at risk. During the opening hours of conflicts in Iraq, Libya, and Syria, VLS-equipped ships fired the first salvos before jets even took off. The reality is, those floating magazines became America's go-to tool for projecting power without warning. But here's the catch. The system only works if the cells stay full. A destroyer with 96 cells but only 40 missiles loaded is a half-empty magazine, and loading takes time. Ships pull into port. Cranes lift missiles one by one into each cell. The process takes days. During the Red Sea operations in 2024, U.S. destroyers fired interceptors so fast that some ships had to rotate out of the combat zone just to reload. They weren't damaged, they weren't broken, they were empty. And empty cells don't stop missiles. China's watching all of this, and they're building faster. For 2 decades, the U.S. Navy owned the VLS advantage. No other fleet came close. American destroyers and cruisers sailed with more launch cells, better missiles, and global reach that no rival could match. That era is over. China's People's Liberation Army Navy is closing the gap at a pace analysts didn't predict 5 years ago. By 2025, China's surface fleet is projected to operate nearly 9,000 vertical launch cells. That's more than America's 8,400. The math is simple and brutal. China built more VLS-equipped destroyers in the last decade than the U.S. built in the last 20 years. The Type 055 cruiser alone carries 112 cells. China launched 8 of them since 2017. The Type 05 2D destroyer carries 64 cells. China has over 25 of them in service right now, with more under construction. What most people don't realize is that this isn't just about raw numbers, it's about geography. China's fleet operates primarily in the Western Pacific. That means nearly 9,000 cells concentrated in one theater. The U.S. Navy spreads its 8,400 cells across the Atlantic, Pacific, Mediterranean, and Arabian Sea. In a conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea, China could mass more launch cells in the fight than the United States. The distributed magazine that gives America global flexibility becomes a liability when the fight stays regional. The International Institute for Strategic Studies ran the cell counts in late 2024 and published the results. The U.S. advantage in VLS cells, once a margin of thousands, had compressed to hundreds, and the trajectory isn't slowing. China's shipyards are launching new destroyers faster than American yards can replace aging cruisers. The truth is, the floating arsenal strategy only works if you have more floating arsenals than your adversary. Right now, that edge is disappearing. And then the Red Sea proved the whole system has another problem: consumption. In 2024, U.S. destroyers deployed to the Red Sea faced waves of Houthi drones and anti-ship missiles. The threat was persistent. Low-cost drones launched daily. Each one required an interceptor to stop. A $2 million standard missile to kill a $20,000 drone. The economics were ugly, but the mission was clear: stop everything. So the destroyers fired. Within weeks, ships started running low. Not out of fuel, not out of food, out of missiles. Destroyers that left port with 90-plus interceptors loaded returned with cells half empty. Some ships rotated out of the combat zone entirely just to reload. The operations exposed a hard reality. High-tempo combat drains magazines faster than the supply chain can refill them. The Navy's floating arsenal worked exactly as designed, but nobody planned for sustained engagements where ships fire dozens of interceptors in days instead of months. And here's the part that should worry everyone. U.S. missile production can't keep pace with Red Sea consumption rates. The industrial base builds interceptors in the hundreds per year. The Red Sea burned through them in weeks. Factories can't double output overnight. Supply chains can't conjure raw materials faster. The magazine depth that makes the distributed model work depends on one assumption: you can reload before the next fight. The Red Sea proved that assumption is fragile. China's building more cells, America's spending the missiles it already has, and the gap keeps shrinking. The U.S. Navy isn't just losing ground to China's buildup, it's losing launch cells from its own fleet. Right now, 12 Ticonderoga-class cruisers remain active. Each one carries 122 VLS cells. That's 1,464 cells across the entire class, and every single one of those cruisers is scheduled for retirement within the next few years. When they go, the Navy loses over 17% of its surface fleet missile capacity in one cut. The TICOs aren't the only platforms disappearing. 4 Ohio-class guided missile submarines remain in service. These aren't the ballistic missile boats that carry nukes. These are SSGs, converted boomers packed with 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles each. That's 616 strike missiles across 4 hulls. They can sit submerged off an enemy coast and deliver precision firepower without anyone knowing they're there. But the hulls are old. The Navy's retiring them one by one. By 2028, all 4 will be gone. That's another 616 cells erased from the total. Do the math. Losing the cruisers and SSGNs removes over 2,000 launch cells from the fleet. The Navy's 8,400 cell advantage drops to 6,400 before a single new ship enters service. And new ships take years to build. The latest Flight 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers carry 96 cells each, but shipyards deliver them 1 or 2 per year. Even if production accelerates, replacing 2,000 cells means building 20 new destroyers. At current rates, that's a decade of construction. The truth is, the magazine is shrinking faster than the Navy can rebuild it. Then there's the reload problem. Remember the Red Sea. Ships burned through interceptors in weeks. They sailed back to port, tied up at the pier, and waited for resupply. But resupply depends on production, and production depends on factories running at capacity. Right now, they're not. Raytheon builds Standard Missile 2 interceptors, Lockheed builds Standard Missile 3, and Missile 6 variants. Both companies run production lines that output hundreds of missiles per year, not thousands. The Red Sea consumed interceptors faster than factories could replace them. And it's not just about building more. It's about the supply chain behind the missiles. Rocket motors require specific chemicals. Guidance systems need microchips. Warheads need explosives and precision machining. Every component has a lead time. Every supplier has capacity limits. You can't just turn a dial and double missile output. The industrial base isn't designed for surge production anymore. It's optimized for steady-state peacetime orders. High-tempo combat breaks that model. What most people don't realize is that empty VLS cells are just empty tubes. A destroyer with 96 cells but only 50 missiles loaded is a 50-cell destroyer. The rest is dead weight. The floating magazine only works if the magazine stays full. And right now, the Navy's facing a future where more cells sit empty because production can't keep up, ships retire faster than replacements arrive, and operational tempo drains stocks faster than anyone planned. The Congressional Budget Office looked at the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan and flagged the problem. The plan calls for distributing firepower across more hulls, but it doesn't solve the near-term capacity crunch. Building small distributed platforms is smart for the 2030s. It doesn't help in 2026 when the cruisers retire and the plan keeps adding cells every quarter. The reality is the U.S. Navy's floating arsenal is facing pressure from 3 directions at once. China's building faster, retirements are cutting capacity, and combat operations are proving the system can run dry faster than anyone predicted. The Navy knows the problem, and they're already exploring solutions that sound like science fiction but might be operational within years. One idea gaining traction: Turn merchant ships into missile carriers. The concept is simple. Take a commercial container ship, a bulk freighter, or even a repurposed oil tanker. Install modular launch systems on deck. Load them with missiles and drones. Now you've got a floating arsenal that didn't require a decade of shipyard work or a multi-billion-dollar contract. The U.S. Naval Institute published the concept in early 2025. The quote is direct. Turning merchant ships into warships with missiles and drones would expand the combat fleet quickly. This isn't about replacing destroyers. It's about adding magazine depth without waiting for new warships. A converted merchant ship might carry 200 to 300 launch cells. It won't have the sensors or speed of a Burke-class destroyer, but it doesn't need them. It sails with a battle group. The destroyers provide targeting data. The merchant ship provides the missiles. The reality is, you just tripled your magazine capacity without building a single combatant. The model works because modern naval combat is networked. A destroyer's radar tracks an incoming threat 150 miles away. That data transmits to every ship in the group. The merchant arsenal ship launches an interceptor based on that track. The missile flies, the threat dies, and the destroyer's own cells stay full for the next wave. What most people don't realize is that in networked warfare, the ship that fires the missile doesn't have to be the ship that finds the target. You just need enough tubes in the fight. The concept scales fast. The U.S. has thousands of commercial ships. Converting even a few dozen into missile carriers adds thousands of cells to the fleet in months, not decades. And they're cheaper. A Flight 3 destroyer costs $2.4 billion. A merchant conversion might cost $200 million. You get 10 arsenal ships for the price of one destroyer. The math favors quantity, but arsenal ships solve only half the problem. The other half is still production. Adding 3,000 cells to the fleet doesn't help if you only have 1,500 missiles to load. The industrial base has to catch up. That means expanding factories, securing supply chains, and contracting for higher output. The Defense Production Act gives the government authority to prioritize orders and accelerate timelines. It's been used for shipbuilding before. It can be used for missiles now. The Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan reflects the shift. Distribute firepower across more platforms. Build smaller, cheaper ships in higher numbers. Keep the magazine moving and multiplying. Instead of concentrating 1,000 cells on 10 ships, spread 1,000 cells across 20 ships. Lose one and you lose 50 cells, not 100. The distributed model gets even more distributed. The truth is, America's missile vault strategy isn't failing, it's evolving. The floating magazine worked when the U.S. had an untouchable lead. Now the lead is gone, so the Navy's adapting. More ships, cheaper platforms, faster production, distributed lethality. The next 5 years will decide which model wins. China's got the cells. America's got the network. Type proud in the comments if you believe the U.S. Navy can keep the edge. And if you want more deep dives into what's really happening with American naval power, hit that subscribe button right now.